My name is Daku, and I'll tell you right now, I didn't see any of this coming. The street was quiet, the kind of afternoon where the sun hits just enough to make the steps warm under your palms. I walked up the staircase to Elise's apartment, toolbox in hand, already imagining the clanking, leaking chaos of an old washing machine. The door swung open before I could knock.
Thanks for coming. My washing machine, it just stopped mid-cycle.
Elise stood there, framed by sunlight spilling from the hallway, her posture effortless, confident. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, but something about the way she moved made it feel deliberate, precise. The kind of presence that fills a room without needing to speak.
Mind if I grab a snack while you figure it out?
I stepped inside, the scent of lavender and faint detergent floating around me. I noticed the soft hum of her fridge, the way the light reflected off the countertop, the faint smudge of fingerprints on the cabinet near the sink. Small things, but the kind that tell you a person leaves their mark everywhere they go. That's when I noticed Mara, her roommate, leaning back against the doorway, arms folded, quiet but watching.
So, you're the infamous handyman everyone's been talking about?
Her voice was calm, even, but there was an edge to it. Not challenge exactly, more curiosity, testing me. I didn't flinch. Elise smiled nervously, clearly aware of Mara's presence, a silent acknowledgement that I was stepping into a room with more than just a machine.
Mara's been curious. Don't mind her.
Mara's gaze didn't waver. She didn't move, didn't blink much, just watched as I set down my toolbox, each tool sliding softly against the plastic case. I felt her eyes on my hands, tracking the way I arranged the wrenches, the screwdriver, the tape measure. I crouched beside the washing machine, pulling the back panel loose. It was heavier than I expected, stiff with age and a faint smell of mildew. My fingers traced the wires, testing connections.
You're methodical. I like that.
I glanced over my shoulder, curious, but Mara had retreated slightly toward the counter, just leaning, silent, observing. Her eyes flicked briefly to Elise, a subtle glance that spoke more than words.
He's thorough, Mara. You'll see.
The room hummed with the quiet sounds of my work, the screech of metal, the faint clink of screws dropped into my palm. Outside, the street was empty, the neighborhood quiet, almost too quiet. It made the interior noise of the apartment feel intimate, contained, almost secret. Elise moved closer, crouching beside me, just out of necessity to hand me a flashlight. The tip of her fingers brushed mine. A small thing, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the hair at the back of my neck stand on end.
Here, this might help.
Mara's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but a signal. Her arms remained crossed, but I could feel her presence pressing in, closer than comfort would allow. The air was suddenly warmer, charged without a single word being said.
Elise hasn't been exaggerating. You're different from what I expected.
I straightened slightly, testing a connection in the wiring. I noticed the way Mara shifted her weight, subtly closer to me now. Elise leaned over the machine again, hair falling forward, warm against my arm.
I don't even know why I didn't call you sooner.
Mara's eyes didn't leave me. Not once. Her gaze held a question, an unspoken challenge, a pull I hadn't anticipated. I tightened the final connection and gave the machine a tentative spin. It hummed to life, a weak but steady vibration running under my hands. The room exhaled with me. Somehow, the tension hanging between three bodies, charged, unclaimed.
You did it. I didn't think.
And Mara's hand hovered just an inch from my arm before retreating, as if testing a boundary she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. That was when I realized the machine wasn't the only thing on the line, and neither Elise nor Mara would let me leave the room unchanged. The machine rattled and groaned as I adjusted the drum, testing its spin. The sound filled the small kitchen, mingling with the faint hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall.
Careful, it's older than I am.
Elise's tone was playful, but her eyes lingered on my hands, following every motion with a kind of quiet fascination. She stepped closer, leaning over slightly to see the back of the machine. Her hair brushed the side of my arm, warm and subtle.
She's told me about you. Twice a week. I was starting to wonder if the stories were true.
I straightened slightly, looking over my shoulder at her. Mara leaned against the counter, arms crossed, but her posture wasn't defensive. It was calculated, curious, testing me. Her gaze moved over my shoulders, across my back, and then back to my hands working on the machine. Elise glanced at Mara, a flicker of amusement in her eyes, as if silently saying, "See, I wasn't exaggerating."
Maybe he's better than I expected.
I let my hands hover over the wires a moment longer, pretending to consider the best move, though my attention was split between the machine and the subtle tension in the room. Mara shifted her weight slightly, stepping closer without breaking the line of sight from Elise. The faint click of her heels on the tile floor was barely audible, but it carried. I felt it in my chest before I registered the sound.
I like watching someone who knows what they're doing. It's rare.
I adjusted a wire and met her gaze briefly, letting my hand linger a second longer than necessary on the edge of the machine. Mara's lips curved, just slightly, almost a challenge. Elise handed me a screwdriver. Her fingers brushed mine, just the tips. Small, fleeting, but enough to make the air thicken.
Here. This might help.
Mara leaned further against the counter, tilting her head slightly. She watched the exchange, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the interaction, the almost imperceptible pull of curiosity mixed with desire.
So, this is how Elise spends her afternoons, watching him work?
Not exactly.
I tightened a loose bolt and spun the machine's drum with a test twist. The clatter echoed softly, but it felt louder, intimate, like it belonged to the three of us in the small room. Mara's gaze traveled over my shoulder again, closer now, almost brushing the warmth radiating off my back. She didn't speak, just watched. Her presence was heavy in the room, pressing close without a single touch.
I hope you don't mind us hovering.
I didn't step back. Instead, I let the small space between Mara and me shrink. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Elise, then back to me, and for a moment, the three of us were suspended, all tension and anticipation. I noticed Mara's arms were still crossed, but the tightness of her hold hinted at something beneath the surface. Maybe curiosity, maybe something more. Maybe both. Elise's elbow brushed mine as she passed me a cloth, the warmth of her hand lingering longer than required. Mara's breath, subtle but noticeable, mixed with the faint scent of her perfume, sweet and slightly sharp, and I felt it wrap around me, making every movement deliberate, careful, and charged.
Elise said you had a way of making even a broken machine look manageable. I can see why.
I allowed a small smile, focusing on the machine's wires, but letting my shoulder brush Mara's arm slightly as I shifted. She didn't recoil. She didn't pull away. The smallest acknowledgement, a shared moment of proximity, but enough to plant a seed.
You're thorough. That's rare too.
Mara tilted her head, eyes following every flick of my hands, every slight motion, every small gesture of Elise leaning closer. It was like the room had shrunk, and the world outside didn't exist. And then, just as I tightened the last screw, I felt the room hold its breath. Mara leaned slightly closer, the distance almost intimate. Elise's fingers lingered on the machine's edge as she stepped back just enough to watch, eyes bright, with unspoken amusement and interest. I realized in that moment that it wasn't the washing machine that mattered anymore. It was the heat, the proximity, the silent observation of two women who had been watching me, testing me, and finding the results unexpectedly engaging. The machine finally coughed back to life, spinning with a steady hum. The soft vibration ran under my hands, up my arms, and I noticed Mara shift slightly closer behind me, her presence brushing the back of my shirt.
You did it. I didn't think you could.
Elise's voice was soft, but it carried a kind of warmth that made the air in the kitchen feel heavier. She leaned forward slightly, hair brushing the side of my arm as she reached to steady the machine.
Elise wasn't exaggerating. You're different.
Her fingers brushed lightly against my forearm as she stepped just behind me. Not pressing, not grabbing, just enough to make the skin react. A spark. A pulse. I straightened slightly, feeling the combined warmth of the two women, Elise leaning close, Mara's hand tracing the faint line of my sleeve. The room felt smaller, tighter. Every sound seemed magnified. The machine's hum, the soft click of Mara's heels as she shifted her weight, the subtle inhale of Elise as she adjusted her stance.
I hope you don't mind us hovering.
I didn't move away. Instead, I let my hands linger on the machine's panel for a moment longer, aware of Mara's fingers sliding back down my arm in tiny, deliberate motions.
She's been talking about you for weeks. I was curious.
Elise's eyes flicked to Mara, a silent exchange passing between them. Her lips curved into the tiniest smile, almost mischievous. The kind that says she knows exactly what's happening and is daring me to notice it too.
Maybe you're better than the stories made you seem.
Mara's hand lingered just above my wrist, brushing against my skin in a way that was almost accidental but too deliberate to be random. I felt the warmth, the slight pressure, the teasing edge. I shifted slightly to tighten a bolt, letting the movement create a subtle brush of my back against Mara's hand. She didn't recoil. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in just a fraction, observing, measuring, testing. Elise handed me a rag, her fingertips grazing mine on purpose, I suspected. She leaned closer, inhaling softly, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with Mara's, an intoxicating blend of floral and spice.
Here, this might help with the waterline.
Mara's eyes narrowed, following every flick of my hands, every subtle motion of Elise's body. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was actively participating in the tension, creating it with proximity alone.
I've never met anyone who notices like you do.
I allowed a small smile, meeting her gaze briefly before returning my attention to the machine. But the awareness remained. The brush of fingers, the weight of two women in the same space, their attention focused entirely on me. Elise moved closer again to inspect the back of the machine. Our bodies nearly touched as she leaned over my shoulder. Mara's hand grazed my upper arm this time, sliding slowly, deliberately, along the line of my bicep. I could feel the tension coil, tightening with every shared glance, every brush of skin. The kitchen seemed suspended in time. The spinning drum beneath my hands, the heat of two women pressing in, the soft, almost inaudible breaths punctuating the room.
You make it look easy.
Mara's hand lingered, fingertips tracing along my sleeve in a subtle, teasing path. Her touch wasn't urgent, but it carried weight, intent, and the unspoken invitation of something more.
Elise. I think it's obvious why you've been talking about him.
I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the moment stretch, feeling the dual warmth of their presence. The way Elise's hair brushed my arm, Mara's fingers gliding along my forearm. And in that instant, the three of us existed in a bubble of unspoken acknowledgement, the kind of moment where the world outside ceases to matter, and every breath, every brush of skin carries meaning. I straightened fully, letting my hands rest briefly on the machine, but keeping just enough proximity for their touches to linger. Mara's hand retreated slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on me, calculating, curious.
I didn't expect this to be so intense.
I glanced between them, a small, knowing smile tugging at my lips. For the first time, I felt that the afternoon had shifted. The machine was fixed, but the real work, the real tension, was just beginning. The kitchen felt smaller now, the late afternoon sun slanting across the countertops in long, warm streaks. The hum of the washing machine seemed louder somehow, filling the space between us with a subtle rhythm.
We've been talking about what it would be like having you here.
Her fingers brushed along my forearm again, this time with purpose, deliberate and teasing. I didn't step back. The brush of her skin sparked something inside me. A thrill, a heat that spread across my shoulders and down my back.
You don't need to say anything. We both notice.
Elise leaned closer, the warmth of her body pressing softly against mine as she rested a hand near my elbow, careful but intimate. The room pulsed with tension, and I could feel the space between the three of us shrinking to almost nothing. Mara's hand traveled a slow, deliberate path along my arm, brushing past the elbow, the skin tingling where her fingertips lingered. Her eyes locked on mine, challenging, testing, and I met her gaze without hesitation.
I didn't think it would feel like this, seeing you, here, close.
Elise's lips curved into a small, almost shy smile, but the warmth of her presence was undeniable. She moved slightly, tilting her body so that her shoulder brushed mine. The combination of Mara behind me and Elise to my side pressed in on every sense, every nerve ending.
We've been curious and patient.
The tension coiled tighter with every movement. Mara's fingers slid slowly along my forearm again, tracing the line of my sleeve with subtle intent. Elise leaned over just enough to let her hand brush the edge of my chest as she examined the machine. Every touch, every brush of skin, carried unspoken words, curiosity, desire, the thrill of proximity. I straightened, letting my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the countertop. Mara's hand followed the movement, grazing my wrist. Her eyes didn't leave mine. The heat of her gaze pressed harder than the touch itself.
Elise. I think I'm starting to understand why she's been talking about you for weeks.
You're different. Better than expected.
Mara's hand lingered just above my forearm, a teasing, deliberate pause, while Elise's fingers traced the edge of my sleeve again, warmer this time, intentional. I could feel the heat radiating from both of them, a slow, building pressure that left no space for distraction. I let my hand rest on the machine, fingers just above the drum, but shifted slightly so that Mara's touch pressed closer. Elise's hand grazed my arm, brushing against my forearm in tiny, intentional motions. The air around us seemed to thrum with electricity, every breath measured, every glance charged.
We've been imagining what it would be like if you stayed a little longer.
Mara leaned closer, her lips near my ear, her words soft but deliberate. The warmth of her body pressed along my back, the subtle weight and intent undeniable.
And seeing you work, it's impossible not to notice.
I didn't flinch. Instead, I allowed the brush of fingers, the weight of their bodies, and the closeness of the space to envelop me. My gaze moved between Elise and Mara, noticing every micro-expression, every tiny movement, the way Elise's fingers lingered, the curve of Mara's lips. The room seemed suspended. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, but inside, it was only the three of us, heat and tension entwined. Every touch, every subtle contact, every shared breath had accumulated into a coil ready to snap.
I don't want this moment to end.
Mara's hand traced down my arm, then paused. The hesitation was deliberate, testing, asking without words. Elise leaned just a fraction closer, her shoulder pressing softly against mine. I could feel the warmth of both of them at once, the slow burn of touch and intent. I smiled slightly, letting my hand hover near theirs without moving away, acknowledging the tension, the charge, the shared electricity in the room. The peak had arrived. Not a single word had been wasted, every movement deliberate, every brush of skin filled with meaning. For a long moment, the three of us existed in that space, pressed together, aware of every nuance, every heartbeat, every sigh. The afternoon had shifted. Nothing could be undone. The kitchen felt warmer now, but not just from the afternoon sun. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words, quiet confessions, and the lingering heat of touches past.
I didn't know I'd feel like this, watching you work, hearing Elise talk about you.
Her hand lingered near mine on the counter, hovering, hesitant. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something fragile and urgent all at once.
He's different from anyone we've known.
Elise's words were soft, careful, but there was honesty in them that made the tension stretch taut in the room. She stepped a fraction closer, brushing her hand lightly across the edge of the countertop near my fingers. I let my hands rest for a moment, acknowledging the heat in the space without moving away. Mara's eyes met mine, uncertain, as if asking permission to exist closer, to let the vulnerability show.
I've never let myself notice someone like this. And now, I don't want to stop.
Elise's lips curved in a gentle smile, almost shy, almost nervous, but the warmth in her gaze held me steady. She leaned slightly forward, her shoulder grazing mine. Mara's hand, finally, brushed against the back of my hand, soft and deliberate.
You make it hard not to notice.
The three of us were caught in a quiet orbit, each aware of the others, each sensing the shift from teasing to honest vulnerability. The washing machine's hum had faded into the background. The real rhythm was in the space we shared, the small touches, the lingering gazes. Mara's fingers traced lightly along my wrist, then paused. Her eyes searched mine, questioning. Not testing, not teasing. Simply opening herself, letting me see that she wanted this, wanted connection, wanted honesty.
I didn't expect this. I thought it would just be fun to watch. But, it's not just that anymore.
Elise's hand brushed mine on the counter, just the tips of her fingers, and I felt the warmth pulse through the simple contact. Her eyes held mine for a long beat before she looked down at the machine, letting the room settle for a moment.
I think we've all been holding back, haven't we?
I nodded subtly, letting my hands hover above the counter, acknowledging their presence without intruding, without claiming. Mara leaned slightly closer, her shoulder grazing my back, the faint warmth enough to send a shiver down my spine.
It's strange, isn't it? How quickly everything can feel like it's impossible to ignore.
Elise's eyes softened. She shifted so that her hand rested just above mine, fingers brushing the warmth of my skin. Mara mirrored the motion behind me, letting the two of them close the circle, careful but intimate.
You've changed the whole afternoon. I wasn't expecting this to feel like anything real.
I let the small pause linger, letting them feel the space, letting the room hum with quiet acknowledgement. Mara's hand pressed lightly against my forearm, deliberate, grounding, tentative. Elise leaned in just enough that the brush of her shoulder against mine carried weight, intention, and the tiniest spark of desire. For a long moment, there was no need for words. The tension that had built over hours softened, replaced with warmth, trust, and vulnerability. I could see it in their eyes, the small flickers of hesitation and honesty, the recognition that we were all here, together, in this fragile orbit of proximity.
I don't want to overstep, but I also don't want to ignore it.
We don't have to say everything at once. Just being here is enough for now.
I smiled slightly, letting my hand hover just above theirs, acknowledging the intimacy without forcing it. The air was thick with possibility, soft with acceptance. For the first time, we weren't testing, teasing, or hovering at the edges. We were simply present. And in that quiet, heated moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about the washing machine anymore. It wasn't about proximity or curiosity. It was about vulnerability, trust, and the first honest acknowledgement that desire, in its quiet, dangerous form, was threading between the three of us. Mara's fingers retreated slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on mine. Elise's hand lingered, a soft weight of reassurance. And for the first time that afternoon, I allowed myself to simply exist in that warmth, letting the tension soften just enough for real connection to breathe. The room felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. The gentle warmth of the afternoon had shifted, replaced by a subtle tension, a pulse that hadn't been there before. Elise straightened, glancing at the clock on the wall, then toward the doorway. The sunlight had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the countertops.
I should probably start dinner soon.
Mara's hand lingered just above mine, a faint hesitation in her touch. I noticed the slight shift in her weight, the narrowing of her eyes, as though she was gauging my reaction.
Dinner? Already?
Yeah. I didn't expect you to be here this late.
The words felt harmless, but the subtle tension in the room shifted. Something unspoken was waiting to surface, an obstacle to the intimacy that had been building all afternoon. Mara stepped back slightly, crossing her arms again, though this time her posture was wary, cautious, almost protective. Her gaze moved between Elise and me, assessing, testing boundaries.
I guess it's time I step out for a bit. Some errands.
Her tone was careful, but I noticed the slight flush in her cheeks, the uncertainty in her eyes. The warmth and tension we had shared now collided with hesitation, a test neither of them had prepared for.
Mara, you don't have to leave.
I should. For now. I just need a moment.
Mara's retreating hand brushed lightly against mine, deliberate, a soft goodbye that carried the weight of the intimacy we had shared. Her eyes lingered on me before she stepped toward the door, hesitating just long enough to let the tension coil one last time. The door clicked softly behind her, and the room felt emptier immediately, despite Elise standing just inches from me. The energy we had shared, the heat, the tension, the vulnerability, it lingered, suspended, almost electric.
I'm sorry about that. She can be protective.
I shook my head slightly, letting my hands rest on the countertop, feeling the warmth of her nearby body. The soft brush of her sleeve against my arm reminded me that the closeness hadn't vanished, only shifted.
I didn't mean to make things complicated.
I looked at her, noting the subtle tremor in her hands as she adjusted the hem of her blouse, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. This wasn't about the washing machine anymore. It never had been. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the window, a reminder that time was moving forward, that the moment of intimacy we had shared was fragile, delicate, and could break with the slightest misstep.
I want this. I want us to be honest, even if it's messy.
Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning. I shifted slightly, letting my shoulder brush against hers, testing the comfort of proximity, the lingering warmth. And yet, the conflict lingered, the presence of Mara, the unspoken questions about boundaries, the fear of misreading signals. Each of us had to navigate this fragile new territory carefully, balancing desire and restraint, curiosity and respect. I reached for her hand lightly, fingertips brushing hers, not demanding, not assuming, simply acknowledging. Her fingers trembled slightly at the contact, but she didn't pull away. The tension remained, yes, but it had shifted from uncertainty to anticipation, from hesitation to possibility.
I'm scared of making a mistake. But I also can't ignore this.
I smiled softly, letting my thumb trace along the back of her hand, subtle, deliberate. The conflict was real, external and internal, but the desire, the vulnerability, the connection we had nurtured wasn't gone. Mara's absence was palpable. It reminded us both of the stakes, that intimacy, no matter how gentle or intense, had consequences. That every touch, every glance, carried weight now.
Maybe we just need to take this one step at a time.
I nodded, leaning slightly closer, letting the warmth of proximity fill the space. The conflict hadn't been resolved. It was merely acknowledged, measured, and respected. The bond we had begun to forge was strong enough to withstand hesitation, fragile enough to demand patience, and electric enough to promise what was coming next. And in that quiet, tension-filled space, I realized that challenges weren't barriers, they were markers. The moment of trial, of hesitation, made the intimacy more real, more urgent, more worth pursuing.
Thank you for being patient with me.
I let my hand linger near hers, letting the warmth, the connection, the tension speak for us. Outside, the day continued. Inside, we were suspended in a fragile equilibrium, desire tempered by respect, heat balanced with hesitation, intimacy tested but alive. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the kitchen was bathed in soft, amber light. The tension that had tightened the room all afternoon had transformed into something warmer, more deliberate, a quiet intimacy that hummed beneath our movements.
I'm glad you stayed.
Her hand brushed lightly against mine on the countertop, a gesture both gentle and certain. Mara had stepped out briefly, giving us space, but her presence lingered in the subtle weight of what had passed, the heat, the attention, the shared moments of closeness. I straightened slightly, letting my shoulder graze hers. The warmth of her body, so close, so real, made the room feel smaller in the best way possible. Elise's eyes met mine, steady, unflinching, carrying all the honesty and vulnerability of the afternoon.
I don't want this to be just a fleeting thing.
I nodded, letting my thumb trace along the back of her hand. I could feel the faint pulse beneath her skin, steady and warm. The connection we had built, small touches, deliberate glances, lingering proximity, had matured into something undeniable. The kitchen felt suspended in time, the hum of the washing machine long forgotten. Mara's earlier presence still weighed in the room, a silent acknowledgement of the tension we had navigated, the boundaries we had respected, the desires we had tested.
I want honesty. No pretense, no holding back.
I allowed a small smile, meeting her gaze fully. I leaned slightly closer, letting my shoulder brush against hers, not pressing, just acknowledging the space we shared. The intimacy was mutual, earned, deliberate. And then Mara returned, stepping quietly into the kitchen, a small, cautious smile on her lips. Her eyes flicked between Elise and me, aware of the distance we had created, but not threatened by it.
I hope I'm not interrupting anything.
No, you're just in time.
Mara's presence wasn't a complication anymore. It was a part of the equilibrium we had established, a shared understanding, a recognition that desire and connection could coexist with respect and boundaries. I extended my hand slightly toward Mara, just enough to acknowledge her role in this afternoon, the curiosity and warmth she had offered. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, deliberate and respectful.
I've been observing, learning. I think I understand now.
Elise's hand lingered near mine, her shoulder pressing softly against mine, grounding me in the moment. Mara's presence behind me was steady, deliberate, a balance of curiosity and acknowledgement.
We don't need to rush anything. We can find our pace. Together.
I nodded, letting the small gestures speak, the brush of fingers, the warmth of bodies close, the subtle weight of presence. The afternoon had built to this moment, and now it was time to honor it, to let the connection settle fully, unhurried and complete. Mara stepped closer, just behind me, letting her presence be felt without pressing, a shared warmth that balanced the room. Elise leaned slightly into me, and I could feel the subtle shifts in posture, the mutual recognition of what had been built and what was possible. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The room was alive with quiet acknowledgement, warmth, touch, proximity, and the electricity of honest desire.
I feel like we can be open. Fully.
I let my hand rest lightly over hers, a subtle pressure, an affirmation. Mara's hand brushed along my arm, a soft, deliberate motion, mirroring the connection we had forged. The room was filled with unspoken promises, shared attention, and the acknowledgement of vulnerability made safe. And then, slowly, naturally, we let the tension soften into warmth. Hands lingered just a second longer, shoulders brushed lightly, and every small gesture was deliberate, mutual, intentional. The connection was earned. The slow burn of hours had become a quiet, stable flame.
I'm glad we didn't rush.
Me too.
I smiled, letting the room settle around us. The conflict, the hesitation, the testing of boundaries, all of it had led here. A space where intimacy, desire, and trust could coexist. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized the afternoon had changed us. Not with a single explosive gesture, but with deliberate, earned closeness. The heat, the touches, the small confessions had formed a connection that was honest, intense, and real. The washing machine had been fixed, but it was only a prelude. The real repair, the real work, had been done in the space between us. In every glance, every brush of skin, every hesitant, deliberate movement that had taught us all something about desire, trust, and the fragile, beautiful tension of intimacy.
Together, we can figure this out.
And see where it leads.
I nodded, letting my hand rest lightly on both their shoulders, feeling the warmth, the electricity, the slow burn of connection that had stretched across the day. This was our moment. Honest, earned, complete.